Hey family, thank you for tuning into Our Roots podcast with 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗲 Ifa. We're only the strongest roots see the light, brought to you by Botánica Candles and more. And if you haven't had the opportunity, please go ahead and tap on that subscribe button and hit that like button. Before we get into today's episode, first and foremost, I want to go ahead and thank everyone who's joined the VIP membership as well as all of the other tiers. And the best way we're going to go ahead and do that is by giving them all a mention, right? So in our premium superfan tier, first and foremost, thank you to Miss Pumpkin Maddox, 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗏, and All the Difference 2012. Thank you so much, guys. In our supporter tier, 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏, 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗏, and Like It Really Is, thank you. And in our VIP member tier, which is actually our most joined tier, we have Noble, Laja Rocks, Queen Liquid Waters B, the Box Chevy Champ, Donna Moon Goddess, Robert Cifuentes Jr., Exhibit ANY, Street Tuber, A. Shawnee Bush, and 𝗃𝗲𝗿𝗄. Guys, thank you so much. Providing you that value, shouting you guys out, right? And today's episode is one I'm very excited about because it's about an Orisha that really doesn't get spoken about enough. Today is Ifa and Obba Nani, right? And the person we're going to be interviewing is a child of this Orisha. Apart from that, I've had the pleasure of initiating her into Ifa in the Hand of Ifa context. Please join me in welcoming Miss 𝗲𝗏 Obba.
Hello. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
𝗲𝗏, it's been a pleasure to initiate you. It's been a pleasure to have you as a part of our house. And it's going to be a pleasure to be able to speak about your mother, right? Somebody that doesn't get talked about enough. But we're going to be able to demystify a bunch of things and make her as interesting as she already is. So before we get into her specifically, we want to get into you and see how all of this kind of correlates. So first and foremost, where are you from and what's your background?
Well, I'm originally from the Midwest, East Chicago, Indiana, but I am Puerto Rican and African American, and my mother was born on the island of Puerto Rico, so my traditions go back, thousands of years from Puerto Rico. She was a daughter of Shango.
Nice.
And I, late in life, as I was working as a park ranger, working on preserving this history, I realized I needed to continue to keep my mother's traditions alive. So I have been working really hard to, do that. So I went to Puerto Rico, and that's where I found out I was a daughter of Obba. And I have, incorporated it into my life. More importantly, it has saved my life in a lot of ways. I know you'll ask me a few more questions later, but, I think she's the most interesting of all the Orishas. I think if there's one Orisha that helps you to move away from anxiety and depression and following her life, that's the Orisha that is the one who gives us hope that we will overcome things of the mind. So for me, it's really important.
Yeah, I'm really excited about all the parallels we're going to be able to, address with you because, in my opinion, you're prototypical Obba. And, probably people first get that impression of you, they're like, no way. But as we start delving into, especially with the park ranger thing and knowing the different places of nature she liked to be in, it's going to be a really interesting conversation. So going back to the beginning of your spiritual path, when did you first start hearing about Ifa and Orisha?
I actually have been trying to write a book, and my mother always took us out to adventures to do different ceremonies. And I have a very vivid memory of one when I was 10 where I felt that's when my total devotion to nature opened up, and probably why I ended up being a park ranger. But it has always been something that has been part of my family. Again, we lived in Indiana, so it wasn't something that people wanted to talk about openly.
Yeah,
and,
no.
Some of my family still is probably not as accepting or understanding. But I have gone out a long way to educate myself and found it useful for me. But, I think my madrina in Puerto Rico also was my mentor in a lot of ways in terms of my life. And I had a great deal of respect for her. So it was a very important part of my life, pursuing this track.
And at what point after interacting with Madrina, getting back into your roots, did you honestly say, hey, I want to find out who I am? And what was that juncture like when that decision was made with you?
I kind of think Obba pushes me a lot to do some things. I have always suffered from anxiety, and one of the things that I realized I needed to parallel some of my learning and the way that I deal with things with some of the lessons that Obba had learned. Like, one of my important lessons is that, I know that I'm not going to be able to trust everybody, but I can trust that I can handle it, because, Obba
Nice.
was out there. She tried to trust
Yeah.
with one of the wives, and they betrayed her. And I've also learned that, I can't be Oya, and Obba couldn't be her, and I can't be nobody but myself. And so also sitting in the woods and the parallels for me in the woods, outside is my church. And so for me, being able to live a natural life is really important.
And before her being revealed as your guardian Orisha, was she on your radar at all? Like, did you think it was going to be her? Had you even heard of her before that moment came when they asked?
No, I actually thought I was going to be 𝗀𝗻𝗋 or something else. And I remember this distinctly. We went to Puerto Rico. I went with my brother and my best friend. And we were in the room for a very long time, because you know how they do. They throw it and it didn't come out that, and throw it and it kept throwing it. And all the 𝗵𝗸𝗍𝗲s were like, what the heck?
Yeah.
And I happened to be the first Obba that ever came out of my family that I know of. I'm sure there's probably some centuries ago, but in my immediate family, I'm the only one.
No, that's incredible. And I would say, I think I have you, and then your god brother 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗏 as well is a son of Obba, so he was even more spectacular, because if you don't see the daughters, you definitely don't see the sons, But he came with a sign that she spoke heavily in, so it was actually, I think, the first one I asked. But usually every other cases we ask 20 people, and then we're like, all right, let's go to the back of the drawer and see who's still back there, But when it was revealed, how did you feel?
I felt that everything made sense finally. I have always walked a different path, and I think in terms of this particular 𝗃𝗍𝗃, is a little bit different than the others. But it was funny because I was living in New Orleans at the time, too.
Oh, wow.
And so I had never met a daughter Obba, but there was a Santeria from Cuba that was living in New Orleans. And as soon as I came back from Puerto Rico, she took me under her wing. And so I had somebody, kind of helped me a little bit with understanding more about Obba. But I thought it was more than coincidence. It was almost like it meant to be that I ended up meeting this woman. Then I moved, so I came here, and I'm now seeing you. But
absolutely. And now to just get back into Obba's backstory. Obba, she was perfect. She came from a royal family. She was raised very well. She was trained to be the perfect wife, the prototype from the very beginning. She knew how to clean. She knew how to satisfy. She knew how to establish, and she was a perfect woman where everyone wanted to court her, right? But her being from said family and living in the land of Oyo, right, there was only one person she was going to get married off to, and that was Mr. Shango, right? It was prearranged, Obba was very excited. Shango's family was very excited, but Shango was not excited. And it wasn't because Obba didn't have all the qualities a woman should have. It's because Shango didn't have all the qualities a monogamous married man should have, right? And even though he was the king, and even though he had his harem, it was expected that he was going to dedicate and devote his time to this woman, because once again, she was perfect. There was nothing she couldn't accomplish, right? So as they delve into marriage, they court each other. Things are going pretty well. Obba's fulfilling her queenly, duties perfectly, and Shango's doing his king thing. But Shango had a wavering eye, and he had some habits, right? He used to go to the drummings. He used to, do his thing, and he had a couple other situations going on. And one of those situations' names was Oya. Oya was extremely jealous of Obba. It was to the point where she would turn green every time she'd see the queen. But the queen is the queen. So, Shango would explain to her, hey, this is our situation. Respect it, because we're not going to fall into, defaming, the royal house and things like that. So, I was like, okay, whatever. But Obba noticed that Shango would disappear for, extended periods of time, and he would see her leaving Oya's bedchamber, her hut, wherever the situation was. And one day she struck a conversation with Oya, and she said, what are you doing to have my husband around you more than he's around me? And Oya, being very treacherous, and, seeing an opportunity, a weakness in the decision, said, I cut off pieces of my ear and I put it in his cornmeal. She said, oh, you see, that's where I've been messing up. I've been putting okra. She says, no. The king likes to eat his women. And she was like, thank you very much. Obba went home, being dutiful, being obedient. She immediately started incorporating this. So the day that Shango was coming home, that she knew, she had everything ready to go. And Shango sat down, she served him, and he began to devour the cornmeal like he does. But he looked at her and he noticed that for the first time she had her head wrapped. And Obba was actually the first woman to ever wear the 𝗀𝗶𝗱𝗏, which is the ceremonial head wrapping of the wives and the marriage ceremonies in Yoruba land, right? And ironically, the majority of the time, the women wear pink because of Obba, and it's because of Obba it's associated with the divine feminine, right? That's why little baby girls wear pink. It's because of Obba. And he's like, wow, that looks really nice. She said, thank you. He said, is everything okay, though? There's like a weird design on this side. Like you have a discoloration. And she's like, no. So he's like, okay. And he kept eating. And out of nowhere, he started seeing like blood. And he said, what's up with this cornmeal? She said, you don't like it? And he saw that the blotch was getting bigger. So he said, what's going on with your head? And he took her turban off. And at that moment, he noticed that her ear was no longer present. And then he looked in his cornmeal and he saw a whole ear. And he said, have you lost your mind? She said, you don't like this. He said, what in the world would possess you to think I want to be a cannibal? She said, well, your number two, 𝗀𝗏𝗋, told me to do it because that's why you're always over there. And he said, woman, you've been so foolish. How could you fall for that? You know what I'm saying? Obviously, she wants to replace you. And Obba started crying, and Shango was livid because he had delved into taboo. And he said, I'll never shame you with a divorce, but I'll never come back. And at that point, Shango basically abandoned the palace. And Obba, who was unable to live with her shame, left to the woods, right? We're going to do a pause here as far as the story, because there's going to be a line of questioning now, like seeing what Obba went through here, seeing her pedigree, her being, prepared to be perfect, live a certain lifestyle and mold that her family had an idea for her. I mean, you coming up, because you mentioned that where you're from, where you were living, things such as this weren't readily spoken about. How do you feel you've veered off from what your family or the people around you thought you should be?
Well, I am very different. I never got married. I never had any kids, which is very unusual in a Latino family. I pursued my career, which was 40 years working in parks. So, just that aspect, I know people say a lot of the daughters of Obba, don't get married or have kids. And so that's one big aspect. The other aspect is, I truly am passionate about managing my mental health and helping others people manage their mental health. I think for me, one of the things that I represent Obba to have done is to go to the woods and get to know herself really well. Yeah. And I often, and my family thinks it's weird, I go on silent retreats for a week or 2 weeks and I don't speak. I'm sitting in a room with a bunch of people and we just meditate.
That's incredible.
And I think that's most people find it hard to calm their minds, but I think Obba is probably the Orisha that is most important because of her mental capacity to overcome. She manifested her health and moved on, and that is an internal mental thing that you have to do. Nobody can do it for you. So that's why I teach mindfulness and meditation now. And the other thing, too, is I have to always, as a daughter of Obba, always be managing what's going on in my emotions, with my thoughts, and make sure that I have a calm pull in my head.
That's definitely right up her alley. And then, you look at what 𝗀𝗏𝗋 and Shango did to her, because Shango wasn't necessarily receptive of what she had done, even though she hadn't done it under her own accord, right? And then apart from that, believing so much in what was the sorority of the Yoruba women at that point, what 𝗀𝗏𝗋 did to Obba was completely unheard of. So she was, traumatized by it. Have you dealt with jealousy? Have you dealt with betrayal? And if so, how does it resonate with the story and how have you responded to it, or dealt with it?
Well, I think towards the end of my career, I had a really big challenging issue where I was accused of something that I didn't do. Again, one of those situations. And again, it was very hard for me, but I trusted. I call on Shango to help me, because that's in addition to Obba, Shango helps me. And I also went into meditation. And so the issue resolved itself. And so how I deal with it is to stay calm, to go into meditation, and to ask the spirits to take care of it for me. But I've also realized is that it's about a maturing where I know who I am. So if somebody does me wrong, it's okay, because I expect that. I know Let me try to say this a different way. Okay, people will betray you. The thing is, I know when people betray me that I can handle it. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
That's the important thing. I expect things to go crazy, but now I know, after having gone inside and strengthened my mental powers of myself, I can handle the betrayal. And that's what I think Obba did when she eventually came out of the woods. She came out stronger, knowing that she can handle it.
Yeah, no, and definitely it's a skill as we move through life. I mean, Bob Marley said, everybody's going to make you feel pain. You just have to see who's worth it, right? So after going through that situation, Obba couldn't stand to look at anyone or have anyone look at her, so she went into the woods, right? And this is the part of the conversation that psychs me with you, because knowing your background and your credentials. So Obba, she went into the woods and kind of went into a blind fury, where she was just alone. Her children went looking for her. In her blind rage, she killed a couple of her kids. This is why Obba is kind of seen as not sometimes having children, right? And, only one person thought about her in the woods, and that woman was Oshun, her sister, who was greatly hurt by all that had occurred. But before she could get to Obba to kind of help her, console, Obba was already in the jungle. So Oshun was married to Orula, and she went to her husband and said, my sister's going through a horrible situation right now. I need divination done, and I need to know what is it that we need to do to bring her back to reality, because I cannot allow her to end this way, right? Orula, having a pretty good relationship with his sister-in-law, decided he was going to take the time to do it. And when he did the divination, the Odu Obbe was revealed, where Ifa said that he and Oshun needed to go into the jungle and feed Obba, a white she-goat, right? When they went in, they really didn't have too much time to explain anything, because Obba, apart from being in a blind rage, was an excellent warrioress, whatever you want to call it. She would handle men. She was a wrestler. She knew how to handle weapons. She was trained to be everything from a very young age. So when they actually went in, Obba was about to attack them, and Orumila started sacrificing the goat, and Obba started consuming it, right? And little by little, as she started consuming the goat, she started coming back to reality. And at that moment, she saw her dead children, she saw her family, she saw the goat, and she immediately started just breaking down, right? They were able to, come to a conclusion that Obba was going to be able to interact with her children by way of Oshun, and that whoever wanted to interact with Obba directly had to go by way of Orumila, right? And the Babalawos. That's why the Babalawos are so important when it comes to the ceremony of crowning Obba direct, But at that point, after she delegated everything to her extended family, she said, I can't go back to the palace. I don't want to live the way they wanted me to live. That's the whole reason I'm in this situation, because I'm trying to please everybody. I'm going to spend some more time here, but after that, I'm going to the cemetery, right? So looking at how that, that theater kind of unraveled, you were a park ranger, right? To go to the beginning of that, what really drove you into the woods, in your professional, what ended up motivating you to get into that line of work?
I have a lot of parallels in terms of tragedy with Oya. My mother was murdered when I was 13, and then my brother was murdered, and I was not well. Yeah. I was really not well. And I grew up around Lake Michigan, right? And so I would go sit by the lake just to be able to breathe, because I couldn't breathe. And slowly but surely, nature healed me, watching nature, because I realized, this pain that I had is like the fire that breathes. Every fire breathes, you know. So the symbolism in that, you know, something has to die before it can be born again. You know, like when you have a seed, so it has to die before the plant can come out of it.
Yes, ma'am.
And so I realized that, you know, nature gave me all of what I needed to find some strength to move forward. And so there's a magical presence for me in water. And even when I'm stressed now, I go to sleep with YouTube and water running.
Yeah.
Because it just does something about calming my spirit and everything. So, I mean, for me, like I said, nature is my church.
I love that. And it's interesting, the water parallel, because Obba is very complex. A lot of people, and we'll get into this, but everybody says 𝗀𝗏 is the owner of the cemetery. She's actually not. She actually wants no parts of the cemetery because she doesn't want to go in because Obba's in there, you know. And Obba, when she went into the cemetery, stopped being the soft, refined woman that she was in the castle, and she was like, if you come in here, I'm going to handle you. And 𝗀𝗏 couldn't see Obba face to face, and 𝗀𝗏 was quite a warrior as well, but Obba was on another level. 𝗀𝗏 would, you know, beat up other women. Obba would beat up men, you know what I'm saying? So, but it's interesting, the parallels, because Obba is also a river deity, you know, and the fact that the water brought you solace apart from the woods is really interesting, because these are things that were natural in you. You know, when you're in the woods, you know, obviously you see a lot of creatures, and animals played a huge role in Obba's life, because when she was alone meditating in the woods before she was going to move on to her next chapter, that's who she would interact with, because they became the only beings that she trusted. You know, what's your relationship like with animals? I mean, I know, because I know your cats very well, but, you know, when you were out there, what was that relationship like?
You know, I'm very much an advocate for animals, but it was very strange, because when I was living in the Grand Canyon, when I throw my trash out and it would be just like dusk, the elk would come towards me and just look at me, and I would think, wow, you know, and that's kind of something you need to be careful of, and that's not something we don't encourage people to go near animals, but and I could just feel by looking in their eyes. For me, when I see an animal, I see a being. You know, I have been in the woods where I have seen other species taking care of other species, you know, or that a animal smaller will fight a bigger animal just to get that baby.
Yeah.
And so there's a life force there that is something that I want to expand in me and just, you know, keep being connected to.
That's beautiful, because it's kind of sad that nowadays you might have to go into the jungle to really find humanity in something that's not human. You know, when you're talking about, you know, them taking care of each other, them interacting, those motherly instincts, which are so fierce, which is what Obba's motherly instincts were so intense that she killed her children to defend them, you know, because she didn't want them to go through the pain that she had went through in her family, you know. And after the woods, now she heads to the cemetery. And going back to the point with 𝗀𝗏, 𝗀𝗏 isn't the owner of the cemetery. She's the owner of the marketplace, right? And the reason being is because when Obba went in, 𝗀𝗏 said, I'm not going in there. So what 𝗀𝗏 does is she takes the souls to the gate, or she receives them at the gate, because 𝗏𝗏 brings them. And at that point, she leaves them there so that whoever can come and take them to the tombstone. That is actually the representation of Obba. It's the layer that goes above the grave, right? And why did she choose this? Because there's another woman who was taken advantage of by Shango, and that's why Shango doesn't like to be around 𝗀𝗏 and the cemetery either, and her name was 𝗀𝗏, right? Very similar situation, because 𝗀𝗏 was actually tempted by Shango, because 𝗀𝗏 had made a pact with her father, Olodumare, to be celibate and dedicate herself to spirituality, but Shango, always wanting what he shouldn't and can't have, tempted her out of her promise, right? He didn't want to shame his daughter, but Olodumare said, you have to disappear now. So both of these women ended up in the grave, and they have to do with the decomposition process. But they were able to help each other through each of their traumas because they were so similar. So I ask you, because you spoke about advocacy and things like that, in what ways have you been able to help other women through the same things you've been through, or in other situations in general?
Well, right now, that's the whole purpose of me putting together this mindfulness organization to bring people together and help them to end their suffering. I mean, a lot of people are suffering in the head. They're holding on to emotions and thoughts that really don't serve them, and they're not understanding that these things are transitory and how to be able to move through that energy. Because you just take the E off of emotions, it's just motion.
Keep it moving.
And you just have to, even in what we do in meditation, is we even sit with whatever is ugly, and that helps to build your muscle and your heart. But more importantly, I have pretty much my whole entire life been working on some volunteer effort to help people, and even worked in Congress to pass a law to try to get a lot of people hired that would normally not get hired. I also feel that in terms of this conversation and helping other women, it's important to say that a lot of women have helped me. And so it's a sisterhood of just bringing that right energy together for women to connect. And I feel really responsible for some of that, because I don't know if it's a history of Obba or whatever, but I think that bringing women together in harmony is very important.
And that's what Obba was all about, because she is the most feminine energy, even more than Oshun, because Oshun, even though she embodied that role very well, once again, Obba was perfect. The book literally says that. This was the model wife. This was the model woman. So it's incredible you've been involved in that advocacy, because Obba was all about women's suffrage, feminine rights, all of these things that, luckily now are really taking hold, as they should, to allow the woman to be venerated within society as she should, Now, living in a grave, can be a little, daunting, but at the same time, it also, points towards Obba and her children's levels of mediumship, right? How has you going through your initiation processes and your meditations, how has that helped you find that tranquility and serenity spiritually? And was there ever a time where it was very tumultuous, where it was almost like, it was an interruption,
There's a lot that goes on with meditation, but it is never about, sometimes it's calm, sometimes it isn't. It depends on what's going on in your world. But what you do is you bring it to your heart and you work through it. And what most people don't do is they just stuff it in their subconscious, and it comes out in high blood pressure. It comes out of diabetes. It comes out in other things. And so be able to, sit with it and let it go is really important. Now, specifically, you asked me that, the question about, I'm trying to get a good answer for you, but let me just end in saying that for me, I will always suffer from anxiety and depression. I know this. But I know now through meditation the habits of my mind, and I'm able to move myself out of it. And so I think that's important, that people need to learn that life is complicated. There is suffering. I mean, I could lose my brother next week and I could just be in a whole hell of a lot of pain. But I have a process I think I've learned through my Obba that I can sit with things and take them. I also want to say something about that cemetery. Decomposing things in my world is transformation. And so I think there's a representation of bringing birth to something new. And that's what we do when we try to move beyond our pain and put ourselves in a place where, we feel that we can be calm and peaceful, or at least manage the suffering that's in your life.
Yeah, because when even if it's not so much, human beings and, the burial rites, but just plants, just by way of them dying, becoming compost, regeneration, this is the cycle of life. And Obba was there at the beginning, being the mother Orisha to a certain degree, and then right at the end, receiving them once again. So really interesting stuff. Well, a lot of people asked, what did Obba do, after a horrible divorce, after, all of this scandal and whatnot? She kind of did her own thing, but she still had suitors. Men were still very interested with her, even without the ear, you know what I'm saying? So men would go and try to court her, and she said, at this point, you got to earn it, right? So if you could beat me in a wrestling match, I'll marry you. Everybody failed. She was kicking everybody's ass, right? But one man was just trying to find any way he could to be with her, and that gentleman was Ogun, right? Ogun knew, even though he was a great warrior, there was no way he was going to be able to defeat this woman. So he said, I gotta have something up my sleeve here. And he went to visit Orula. Orula performed divination for Ogun, where the Odu of 𝗃𝗶𝗸𝗁 was revealed, where Ifa said, once again, you're not going to be able to beat this lady face to face. But if you do a little witchcraft to her, you might get her, right? So Orula performed a concoction with corn, and he said, right when she's about to defeat you, let this fall on the floor, right? So Ogun presented himself. He made his terms known. And she said, well, these are the rules of combat, and let's engage, And thus it began. Ogun got a couple moves in, but Obba started really, catching on to what he was trying to do. And right when she was about to body slam him, he threw the corn on the floor and she slipped on her back, right? The scripture says that Ogun took advantage because Obba's, legs went in an awkward position and he saw an opportunity and he took it. And thus the marriage was consummated. This is ancient Africa, right? So at that point, they lived happily ever after. Even though it wasn't under the best conditions and Obba ended up seeing the corn, she still appreciated that a man was willing to go to those lengths to be with her, They learned a lot from each other. They were both very, very fearsome. And then apart from that, she actually learned the art of blacksmithing from Ogun. That's why Obba is associated with the metal bronze so much, because they say that Obba and Ogun together constructed the weapons that the Yorubas used in ancient military, action. So a little bit romantic, right? In some way. I ask you, because the child of Obba, just like Obba, everybody was interested in their love life, right? Without going into specifics, how important is that chivalry, when it comes to those kind of interactions?
Extremely important.
Yeah.
Probably very important.
Because Shango wasn't. Shango was the complete opposite of
no. You got to be consistent with your behavior. Actually, my friends say I'm pretty tough, probably more tough than I need to be. So we need somebody to be consistent with their behavior, to have good character, to be engaged in, doing something good for the community. That's just me, I think that is part of a little bit of the Obba thing too.
No, and that's important because the beautiful process, because one thing you've been mentioning up until this point is self-acceptance, right? Knowing who you are, knowing what you want, knowing what you're not going to tolerate. It's a very rocky path with you guys, because in some form or fashion, you kind of live the first aspect of that story where you go through those traumatic events. And then you have this rebirth where it's like, I'm comfortable in my own skin, and this is what I need from you if you want to be around me. And I really think that's beautiful because, once again, with all the pressure that was on this woman, the fact that she did ultimately get to a point where she's like, I'm comfortable with me, I'm comfortable with who I'm with, and I can live and breathe. You know what I'm saying? Obba, really embodies everything that, what the Yoruba woman should be. The same way the Yorubas look at Ogun as being the perfect example of masculinity. In Africa, they crown her direct. In Cuba, they crown her direct. But there's also other processes like crowning Oshun, etc. Could you let people know which one you're most interested in and possibly may move forward with one day, and why?
I'm interested in direct, and because I feel a very strong connection here to this particular Orisha. I also feel, she's not as well. I mean, she's not held up and on her own like they should hold her, like we do in Africa. So I think it's important to hold her up and not put her under Oshun. But
yeah, and you mentioned that you interacted with an Obba priestess in New Orleans. I've had the pleasure of interacting only with two people who have Obba crown direct. One was in Cuba, one was in here. They look pretty mentally stable, because that's what everybody says. Oh, you're going to crown her, you're going to go crazy, she's going to kill you. Do any of those things even cause any form of resistance to it? Or do you how do you feel about those kind of statements?
I don't have any reaction to it. The lady in New Orleans, it was just lovely. she passed away shortly after I moved. But
Well,
I think it depends on the state of mind of that person. Have they done the work? Because you have to. I don't have your training, but daughters of all of us suffer with a lot of mental instability, anxiety, and so you really have to come when you're ready to be there. You have to know yourself, as you said, have gone through the purification, transformation process, so that you're strong enough within your own self.
I think that's great advice, because a house is only as good as the land you build it on, right? So if that head is not stable, if it's not comfortable, if it's not serene, you can put a building on it. It's not going to last. You're building a castle on sand. What advice would you give to those children of Obba who are still going through that, encountering or finding themselves process? What can you tell those people, who are going through what you went through?
I definitely suggest mindfulness and meditation. There's so much out there and a variety of methods, and YouTube just has tons of videos. And but if you can get coached in a class, if you're really struggling with your, the thing about the mindfulness, it helps regulate your emotions and your heart. Because sometimes your thoughts are not in conjunction with what you want. Obba really wanted what she wanted, right?
Yeah.
And but that just wasn't in conjunction with the emotions that were there. So I think meditation is what we come out is better emotional regulation and stability, a clarity in knowing the habits of your mind, a clarity in knowing, what is it that you need and want. And so I think it's important to go through that process.
What would you tell somebody who's interacting with a child of Obba? What should they know? Whether it's romantically, whether it's they have a child that's just been revealed as a child of Obba. What advice would you give to those partners, parents, and friends when interacting with this energy or this person?
Space. I don't know.
That's awesome.
It tends to be that daughters of Obba are very introverted too,
Yeah.
but I don't know. That's maybe just the few I've interacted with. But I think there's a space to let them be who they need to be, not try to put in what you want them to be. But in terms of the other things, trust is a big issue, I think, and so I think daughters of Obba don't make you gotta really be trustworthy. It's like 6 months or a year
Before you can even get the application accepted or reviewed. Better yet, reviewed.
You got to know this person. What is your mama doing? Where's your, where you live, where your kids. So I think they go through the extra effort to build that trust, so they feel safe.
It's interesting you say that about the trust thing, because Obba was a very obscure Orisha when it came to receiving her, let's say 50, 60 years ago, 100 years ago. This was not a deity that you received casually. Like, even the women, because there used to even be a thing back then where only women would receive this Orisha, even then, you would have to go through like a vetting process where they would analyze you, they'd get to know you. Some people were as strict as saying, hey, you couldn't receive Obba until you were no longer interested in, any of those kind of pleasures or anything like that, because it was seen as such a sacred icon, like her, like 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗏, like 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏. It makes a lot of sense why the personality would be that, because to actually receive Obba back then was an equivalent to like doing Ifa. It was an equivalent to like, getting actually just initiated in Orisha just to have this icon. It was a very exclusive group, and you look at Obba, her name really comes from the title Obba, right? Because that's the name of the king, right? But when they wanted a name that was so synonymous with the king, they just pronounced king differently. So Obba became Obba, right? And when we look at the phrase that comes after, Nani, means who is installed within. So it's saying that this person is within the castle and is present. Having been to your home, having conducted spiritual work there, how important is your space to you? Whether it's meditation, whether it's your home. I know it's a very Zen expression, but what's that like for you?
It is my happy place. It's it has to be peaceful. I'm the one in my family that everybody knows, I need peace.
Yeah.
I need calmness. And so I have a house that also has access to a lot of outside.
Yes, you do.
because I have to like sit in my back deck all the time.
I remember when we were doing your 𝗶𝗸𝗶𝗶 and stuff like that. I was looking, I'm like, oh, the neighbors, you know, but it's very much a Zen space. We got it done.
And so, you know, I get up every morning. I walk my neighborhood. I live in this, you know, in a gated community, but there's a bunch of lakes and there's a bunch of woods, and I feel like I'm out in a park somewhere. And so I think that's important. But also, I don't let a lot of people in my house. I'm really very particular about the energy that comes in my house.
As you should be.
And so, you know, that's something I'm very careful about.
Well, you guys pick up a lot. You're born mediums. You're born spiritists. I mean, just the link that she has to 𝗃 is astronomical. And it makes sense protecting the castle because the word 𝗃𝗶𝗸𝗶 means queen, but it's a composed word of 𝗃𝗶𝗹𝗁, which means the wife is Obba, right? Or the wife of the queen is Obba, you know? So it makes sense why, you know, the house is so sacred because it was something that she lost. You know, she said, I don't want to be contained. I don't want to feel like an alien in my own home. If that's the case, I'll go where I'm accepted by it no matter what. Because Obba chose the woods because she knew the animals wouldn't judge her. And she chose the cemetery because she knew the dead wouldn't judge her, you know? You have a lot of things going on. I want to give you the space to, you know, kind of talk about your groups and your advocacy and things like that, because I think it's important that people know the options they have out there, especially if they're dealing with anxiety or, God forbid, abuse or any of these things, and how to cope with it.
Well, right now I'm on Meetup, and I'm teaching courses on meditation. We have one coming up here called Mindful Belonging and Othering. It really looks at how we treat each other and how we can turn around and be more love activists to each other. I do Introduction to Mindfulness, which is a 4-part course that helps you how to manage your emotions, your thoughts, and how to put in positive reinforcement to change your thoughts and how to continue to build a practice around that. In May, we're going to be kicking off a big campaign to, it's Mental Health Month.
Nice.
And we'd like to push some things in the Latino community. So I don't know if this lady's coming from Puerto Rico, but we might have some worldwide known meditators to come down here, and we're going to hold an event. But right now I'm on the Meetup. We do have a website that will be launching probably the next couple of weeks. But, yeah, folks can just find us on Meetup.
Yeah, definitely.
It's called the Red Wing Collective.
Nice. Yeah, and definitely we're going to put your contact information and all these different things so that people who resonate with this interview are able to get in contact with you and look into the different options they have on how to build themselves up and get to that space of serenity, you know. Exciting stuff. Really beautiful conversation, Miss Mata. You've taken us on a whirlwind, but I expected nothing less knowing you and knowing your guardian Orisha. Really beautiful life, really beautiful experience, really beautiful story, because it's one of survival and self-acceptance, right? You know, what final words would you give to our viewers, a lasting message?
I think the most important thing is the ability to let Obba teach you love, you know. And I am learning that and trying to go with it more. So I feel like she's a love activist in some ways for you to open up your heart. Once you accept yourself, that's when the love starts pouring in, just pours in. So again, I'm just asking her to invite love into your life, whether it's self-love or anything else.
Mata, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for this beautiful conversation, and hopefully that energy finds us all. And I think people have so much to gain from this Orisha story and the energy and how it can heal and teach us that self-love, which is the most important and first one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Family, what an epic conversation. Want to thank Mata and her group once again for taking the time to be with us and go over a couple things before we go ahead and disconnect. First and foremost, BotánicaCandlesandMore.com is up and running, where you can schedule all of our services, whether it's mentorship programs, consultations, or order any of the products you need. Our membership program is up and running, as you saw. When we started off the session, we mentioned all of our members, one of the benefits that we have. Please take a look at it. Links are available for you to be able to sign up as we start growing this VIP community and membership community. Botánica candles and more we've mentioned, and then apart from that, this podcast is available on all major platforms, right, guys? From Our Roots Podcast, I want to say thank you, and until next time, see the light.